We're live. This is the first edition, the first live edition of Why Wells Fail. I'm Steve Brown, your host. This is Lloyd Brown, our expert. Lloyd, how's it going?
It's all the good today, Steve. Thank you. How about you?
I'm excellent. I always look forward to these. You know, of all my peers that I hang out with, I know the most about wells and fracking than anybody because I hang out with you, Lloyd.
There you go.
So, refined completions. We're talking about why wells fail, why they fail to perform over time. And today the topic is decarbonization efforts and energy transition. So there's this big thing about being green and capturing carbon and carbon capture and all these things. And so today that's what our conversation is about. So how forward in everyone's mind, Lloyd, is decarbonization or carbon capture in the fracking world?
It's not as big an emphasis as it was in the previous administration, but I would say that it's still, there's a huge amount of capital that has gone into capture. There's a project where they're actually going to scrub it out of the atmosphere and then store it, put it into a brine, a saltwater brine, and then inject it into a formation to hold the CO2 in the ground there. And it's a pretty ambitious project. The amount that you have to do to reduce what's naturally occurring in everyday life, it's a big hill to climb, quite frankly. So, and I don't know if we really understand the overall impacts of it, but it's something that that companies are concerned about. They're looking at, a lot of them are looking at how do they reduce flaring, because flaring creates it's a wasted energy source. Sometimes it's necessary from a safety perspective, like burning H2S, but there's a real emphasis on how to minimize and mitigate and offset what we're doing.
You know, we're entering a time in the U.S. where there's going to be a big boom, no pun intended, as far as energy production in all sorts of ways. I've been hearing this administration talk about even companies will be able to create their own power plants for these data centers, et cetera. I've seen, in this flaring, I've even seen Bitcoin miners that capture that flaring and run it through a process, and it powers a Bitcoin miner unit there on the pad.
It's happening all the time. What they're doing is they're burning that gas to run a turbine that generates electricity, and they're doing it with these very small electrical generating turbines, and then they're using ISO containers, which are shipping containers. They build their mine inside of that container, and they set it out on a pad and generate electricity to power that mine. And many times those are wells that are removed from a sales channel or a sales market for pipeline takeaway. And so it's a really good way to continue to be able to produce the oil out of the well while not having to flare the gas, but being able to convert it into a usable product. And, more of that's happening that I'm aware of in New Mexico, because New Mexico has much more stringent requirements on oil and gas operators than, say, Texas does. And so, but there are a lot of companies that are using that excess gas as well to power electric frac engines, the turbines for those. And so we've got customers, as a matter of fact, that do that. So there's a lot of optimization, utilization, instead of just flaring this, to actually take it and create a value out of it out of something that would be thrown away and creating it into usable energy to either mine Bitcoin or to frack a well. And, I think we'll start seeing a lot more small regional areas of electrical generation, particularly in West Texas, utilizing the gas that is normally flared.
And so that's another form of carbon capture, I would imagine.
It's more about carbon efficiency. Now, some of those turbines are converting methane, ethane, propane, butane, whatever's in that gas stream. They're converting that into the fuel source for the turbine and then converting that into electricity. Now, they're still flaring CO2. Some of them will have some form of way to capture that exhaust eventually, but that's not something that we see a lot of right now.
Are there penalties associated with it? Or are there some entities trying to, penalize fracking?
Tax it. Yeah, there's conversations of that, and I think a state like New Mexico is probably more on the leading edge of that than, say, Texas. But the real emphasis is how do we do it really well, capture as much of it as we can, because our pipeline transportation companies, the companies that take away the natural gas streams, many times the natural gas that we produce has a large amount of CO2 and H2S in it, and they actually have processes that scrub that out. And the CO2, a lot of the carbonated beverages and other forms of dry ice and those kind of things are where they're commercializing the capture of that CO2. And then secondarily, now there are companies that are taking that and actually injecting it into storage in deeper formations. So there's ways that that's being done as we speak.
Is there a detriment effect to the equipment or the pipes, or like when we're worried about acid or
well, out there, if gas is quote unquote wet, which means it has entrained water in it, and you have a higher concentration of CO2, it makes carbonic acid in the pipe. Now there's some metallurgies that can be done, and there's chemical treatments that can be applied to minimize that corrosive effect. And the same thing with H2S, which it makes a sulfonic acid. And the combination of CO2 and H2S together is very aggressive as far as a corrosive environment in produced oil and gas.
So as far as the refined process that you guys have, does it address this in either an indirect or direct way?
Well, it directly affects it. Is our patented process mitigates natural occurring CO2 and H2S from the formation. Natural occurring is not the right. The CO2 and H2S that is produced when we implement fracking and take away or the equilibrium that the geology sits in. When we take it, it's kind of like dissolving an Alka-Seltzer. When we frack it and we shut those wells in, there's carbonate rock that starts dissolving, and also iron sulfide rock called pyrite that starts dissolving. And when it does, it evolves gas. And so our process keeps that from happening. So our wells typically will produce anywhere between 70 and 90% less CO2 than companies that don't use our process. In addition, we see a reduction of up to 90% less H2S that's generated from the geology based on our patented process. And so it has a direct effect. And you have to attack that problem one well at a time. It's not something that you can go just wave a wand and make it work, because there's, I don't know the total well count that we frack, but it's got to be in the hundreds of thousands. And there's very few of the wells that have been completed that have used this process, but it's something that we can impact going forward. And once we mitigate it, it never starts up. We keep the well from ever producing geochemical based CO2 and H2S.
That's interesting. Now, so as in the conversations with the stakeholders who are deciding to, to follow your process, how often does the conversation about carbon capture or CO2 come up?
Not very often, but it's a cost. So whatever they have in their gas, it's an ongoing cost to be removed by the company that they sell that gas to or they transport it with.
Mm.
And so it's called a docking fee, and they charge you based on the volumetric amount of CO2 and H2S in it. So our process, the real benefit is it's a much less corrosive environment, but the big one is there's you're not paying a toll fee for that gas because you're not making it.
Wow.
And that's for the life of the well.
That's a hidden tax in a way. I mean, they know they're going to pay it, but you're eliminating that.
Hidden tax isn't the right word. It's a cost of doing business.
Yeah.
It's just saying it's seen as a cost, a must-have, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not hidden. Everybody knows they're paying it. The thing is what is the compounding effect of that cost every day over a 10-year period? And then you take it not only but one well, but 10, but 100, but 1,000.
Wow.
It's a dramatic impact in the lease operating expense for an operator. Not just taking in all the other benefits that it provides, but just that one ongoing lease operating expense.
So this is not really an expectation that these guys traditionally have of birthing these wells and bringing them online. This is an expectation they haven't really been allowed to have, to capture that or to negate that carbon.
To inhibit it. It's carbon dioxide, right? So when you start looking at carbon tax, there are many forms of carbon. Methane is a produced natural gas. It happens to be one that's very, very hard to capture. It's small, just slightly bigger than CO2. And so methane capture is one thing that the government's really been focusing on. And it's not a bad thing to focus, because it does have some BTU value to the gas, but unlike CO2, has no value whatsoever. So that's kind of a bonus. And then on the hydrogen sulfide side, which it's a greenhouse gas too, because when you burn it, it makes SO2, sulfur dioxide. And you've heard probably back in the 70s about acid rain. Well, generally speaking, acid rain was coming from the burning of H2S and making sulfonic acid when it in an area where that would happen. And so, the capturing of both the sulfur dioxide and the carbon dioxide is an ongoing cost. And a lot of companies will have an elevated amount of H2S, and they actually use an injected chemical to convert it from H2S into a thiosulfate, something that becomes water soluble, and then they dispose it with the water. But it's very expensive, and it's a very large amount of a lease operating expense in the areas where there are high amounts of H2S.
You're talking about the process of pumping, capturing that, and then mixing it with brine, and then pumping it way down deep. Does it eventually bubble up, or does it filter out? What happens there?
Most of the places that they're going, there's multiple caps. Usually it's made out of clays that stop the ability for that solubilized CO2 to migrate. So the answer is no, unless you get a leak in the wellbore and it starts coming through a wellbore, or you happen to contact another well that had gone through that zone, and there's a leak in that wellbore, and you start getting it from that. But typically, the answer is no. It's going to stay down there. The real thing is volumetrically, how much can you inject into that area without creating some of these small earthquakes that happen, where we're injecting a lot of produced water into the ground and creating a problem that way as well. So everything has, there's cost benefit. There's a balance on everything that we do. But if we can keep from making it, that's about as good as you can get.
Crazy. What you're talking about the acid rain, and I get these pictures of Los Angeles covered in smog, and I didn't realize that the LA area is a big oil and gas production area where they just flame. Would you call it flaming? Not flaring. Were they just flaring a bunch of stuff there in that area? Is that what was causing that smog?
No, it's almost all tied to the vehicles, and it's a perfect area to trap up against you have the coastal winds bringing in a lot of moisture, and then you get a lot of exhaust and from vehicles, and that's what causes a lot of the smog. Now there'll be some industrial contribution to that for sure, but there's a lot more tailpipes than there are refinery pipes. And that's why I think there's always been a big push for them to go to an electric model. The challenge is you still got to generate the electricity.
Yeah. And
right now, nuclear was taboo, and now it's coming back into place. And quite frankly, that's the most effective and efficient way to generate electricity with the smallest footprint. But a lot of people are scared of the waste. And again, we got to make sure that we can dispose of it properly in a manner that, it doesn't create impacts on the environments that we live in. But I think there are good places that are doing that.
So if the U.S. is going to be the center of the world, or the capital of the world for AI and crypto, and we're expecting this energy production boom, how do you see the fracking industry changing because of this renewed focus on drill, baby, drill?
Well, oil today was at like 61 and something. That's not as economic as what we really need in the industry. 70 is really a very healthy place for us. And so the drill, baby, drill can be something that an administration wants, but the oil and gas operators, they have a duty to their investors, right? And they're very patriotic, but there's a place that you don't want to create a detrimental effect by overproducing. And so part of our challenge is we've got a lot of natural gas. We're awash in natural gas. When we produce in the Permian Basin and the Delaware Basin, which is a sub-basin of the Permian, those produce a huge amount of natural gas along with the oil. And we need better takeaway pipelines to take it to the coast. and then make it into liquefied natural gas at that point to market all over the world. And that's where we can be really unbelievably energy dominant much quicker than just going out and fracking a bunch more wells, because then all we're going to do is suppress the price. And then you're going to see a massive pendulum swing, which, quite frankly, that's what I've been used to. The almost 40 years I've been in the business, I've seen really 3 catastrophic swings and a total of 6 moves that really had near-term impacts. And so it's not something that I think you're going to see actually happen right now.
So when you compare to the past booms you're referring to, you think this one will be are you thinking that the industry is going in with a little more wisdom?
Well, there's more wisdom, but there's also a lot more fiscal discipline because there's been consolidation. And so the vast number of operators compared to 10 years ago, 9 years ago, we probably have 5 or 6 companies that control 60 or 70% of the total output that we have in the U.S. right now when it comes to shale producing wells. And all those companies are practicing fiscal discipline. You take away, 15, 20, 30 acquisitions that have happened in the last 2 or 3 years, and you put those companies back in play, and I call it bring dumb money in, people that are chasing a fast buck. And that we saw that in every boom since 2000. It happened in the natural gas space, and then we became awash in gas, price bottomed out. We've done it 3 times in the oil space since really 2013 or 14. One of them was not in our control, which was COVID. And COVID was the Saudis, the Russians had ganged up on us, and then you throw in the coronavirus, and man, that's when oil sells for one day, trading day, at a negative value.
Do you think these trade deals are going? So you're talking about piping this to the coast.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think more countries or regions of the world are going to export more because it'll be maybe a deal is made, or it'd be tariff-friendly exports?
I take the president at his word when he says that, we're going to be the energy dominant producer. And that quite frankly is the only way that we can be completely energy dominant mm-hmm. is with natural gas. Mm-hmm. So they're, again, produce more, you make more of the, you make more net carbon. And so, do we need to find ways, or are there opportunities to capture that? Absolutely. To what effect will it have on the environment? I think that science is still to be determined.
So you talk about these companies, since the consolidation, they're more physically, they have more discipline physically, not physical, and then but talk about your patented process and how it complements that thinking.
Well, if you have it, the biggest part about it is if we help our customers lower their long-term operating cost, $1 saved is $1 earned, right? Mm-hmm. If you produce the same amount of valuable product and you reduce the amount of unvaluable or actually a product that costs you money to take care of, then absolutely we're aligned, because it ultimately lowers their cost, which makes their operating margins more stable, more predictable.
This fiscal discipline, the thinking behind that, I would assume, is like they sat down and we have to be more predictable and the returns that we're bringing. Is that?
That's part of it. In the Biden administration, penalized, or I shouldn't say penalized, they strongly encouraged the banking environment to pull away from oil and gas production. And so the capital resources for the independent operators that were needed, that liquidity went away. Additionally, a lot of the private equity money that had been chasing these great returns, that money went away. It really went away, right? There's a lot of companies that got big time burned when COVID came in. And so those two combining structures actually really helped our industry, which is hard to believe, but it created fiscal discipline. And we had to start living within our means as an industry. And then we started seeing tremendous efficiencies, especially in drilling. I mean, it's amazing. One of our customers the other day, they drilled 5 2,000-foot, not 2,000, 2-mile long lateral highways. And I'm sorry, Steve, somebody is dinging me in and it's making me not keep my focus. All right, that'll stop now. They drilled 5 wells in 30 days, 2-mile, 5 2-mile wells. A 2-mile long lateral 10 or 12 years ago, one would have taken 40 days.
Wow.
It's just massively more effective, more efficient. The technology that has been applied that's increased efficiency. The same thing with the ability to frack wells and doing multi-well pads versus one well per pad. It's just, we've gone into a manufacturing mode, which is much more disciplined, more predictable. The downside to that is it can stifle innovation. Mm-hmm. And I'll be quite frank with you, that's probably been our greatest challenge. Is we're wanting to help the industry understand that the way you've been doing things has had a detrimental impact. And we have sound science, and you don't get a patent that has no prior art anywhere in the world if you haven't done something pretty special. And that's what we have. And so our biggest challenge is to, we talked about it last time, is to help companies and those decision makers understand we're not going to harm their reputation. We're not making a recommendation that is based on a testing protocol or process that's to sell a product. Right now, we get compensated by selling products, but our real method is to find out exactly what the rock wants to help it produce as much oil and gas as it possibly can without producing the negative gases of CO2 and H2S.
So the industry has started to systematize the process. Many businesses will adopt systems and processes. It's only smart. It's like EOS, or entrepreneurial operating system. But when it comes to what the prescription is for the geology downhole, it's not a one size fits all. And that's where your patented process comes in. So it's getting that mindset to accept that actually you have an actual system and process to optimize that one piece that's always been an unknown.
That's correct.
It's a guess to them.
It's a best known today, and a lot of it's based on beliefs, but not necessarily the data to back up those beliefs.
Mm-hmm. So that's the opportunity that you have to complement their process, but it's not an expectation that they've had up until this patented process. And for those that haven't listened before, or this is the first time to listen, what's the name of the process, and tell us a little bit behind it right quick.
Well, it's called the Pathfinder prediction process, and it stands on the natural law of equilibrium. And so when we frack a well, we're pumping huge amounts of water and oxygen and different chemicals into a geological formation. We then shut that in while we complete the fracturing process, and then anywhere between 15 and 30 days, we drill that out, what we've done, and we bring that well on production. In that time frame, we've taken something from static equilibrium, and we've created disruption. And so what that geology is doing is it's trying to find its new natural balance under this new environment that we've created. Well, our job and our Pathfinder process is we understand how do we put a dynamic equilibrium, which means we want to stabilize it in a manner that keeps the bad actors from coming off of it, but allowing the release and the mobility of the hydrocarbon from the rock. And so that's what our process does. And in that, it by being able to predict that impact of the disruption that we create, we then can prescribe a series of steps and formulations that suppress and put up a dynamic equilibrium on the geology. And it includes chemistry, but it also includes not doing certain things, eliminating certain things. So there's a real science behind the understanding. And we created secondarily in the process a methodology, a laboratory methodology that mimics this disruption. We're the only company in the world that has the ability to do this and measure how well we mitigate or put dynamic equilibrium on the geology without inhibiting the production of oil and gas.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how you can go into this environment that you described, like my granite countertop, miles below, and then you disrupt it, and you've got clay swelling to plug up the holes, or fines or scaling, all these things that start to work against you on what you spent so much money going down there to liberate. And your process helps you find a new, nice environment where everybody gets along, and the stuff that you're wanting to capture is released without it degrading over time and the production of the well going down and down and down.
That's correct. And we don't impact a decline curve. What we do, however, impact the rate of decline of that curve. We impact the rate that we get to peak oil, and we also impact the rate of decline to peak oil. So it takes longer to get to peak oil for the wells in all of our studies and actual practice, and then it takes them a longer time to decline from that peak oil. So we have a much more parabolic curve in our decline curves than what we see currently happening in the industry.
Wow. So we're improving our capture, what we're capturing and how long and how much we can capture. We're improving that.
Mm-hmm.
And then
we're reducing the amount we have to capture on the CO2 and H2S.
right. And then on the other side is like we're reducing the cost that it takes to get rid of that CO2.
That's right.
Yeah. Fascinating, Lloyd. Anything you want to wrap up with?
The main thing is if folks have questions, they can always reach out. Our website is refinecompletions.com and, or via through our channels right here. And we'll answer those questions. And I just appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we're learning.
Yeah, me too. I'm learning so much, and it's very fascinating and timely. I think more and more attention is being put on, at least as far as my life, right? I'm just learning about all of this explosion of attention that the U.S. is going to get, and this is one of the areas. So Gulf of America, et cetera, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Good job today, Lloyd.
Thanks,
you guys, you listeners out there, join us for next week at the same time. We'll be talking more about why wells fail and what you can do to help your wells win, I guess. All right. And that's a wrap.